never thought I'd be the victim of a Karen's wrath. But when I didn't bend to her demands, things escalated in ways I could never have imagined. Here's how an ordinary HOA dispute turned into a nightmare. The HOA problem began like any other ordinary neighborly dispute. Or so I thought. I had just moved into a cozy little house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, looking forward to a peaceful, uneventful life. The area was nice, the neighbors friendly, and the home was everything I had dreamed of. I was excited about starting fresh and building a life in this community. However, little did I know that my troubles were just beginning. The first few weeks were smooth sailing. The house was in great condition, and I was gradually getting settled in. Then came the first letter from the Homeowners Association. HOA. At first glance, it seemed harmless, a list of community guidelines, rules about the lawn, parking, and general maintenance. I thought it was a good idea to have standards to keep the neighborhood looking nice. However, it didn't take long for me to realize that the HOA, and one particular member, Karen, took those rules very seriously, too seriously. In fact, the first interaction with Karen occurred when I had a small garden party to celebrate my housewarming. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a few friends, some barbecue, and good conversation. I made sure to follow the HOA's noise rules, and everything was quiet by the time the curfew hit. I thought I was in the clear. But the next morning, I received a letter in the mail from the HOA. The letter was from Karen, informing me that I had violated the HOA's guidelines by hosting a gathering without submitting a party request form. I was taken aback. I hadn't known about the form. It seemed like an unnecessary formality for something as simple as a gathering with friends. But it was a mistake, and I accepted it, apologizing and promising to follow the rules in the future. I thought that would be the end of it. But Karen had other plans. Over the next few weeks, I started receiving multiple complaints, each one more minor than the last. First, it was about my mailbox being a few inches out of place. Then, it was about my lawn not being mowed at the exact recommended length. The complaints started to feel more like a personal vendetta rather than a concern for the neighborhood. Karen had a way of making everything seem like a violation. It didn't matter if I was following the rules or not. If I didn't meet her standard of perfection, she was on my case. At first, I tried to be polite and cooperative, wanting to keep the peace. I fixed the mailbox, trimmed the lawn more precisely, and adhered to every small guideline she mentioned. But nothing seemed to satisfy her. Each time I thought we were past it, there would be another complaint. I began to feel like I was constantly walking on eggshells in my own home. I wanted to stand up for myself, but I didn't want to make things worse. After all, this was a tight-knit community, and I didn't want to be the one causing drama. The tipping point came when Karen started knocking on my door almost every other day, demanding to inspect my house for violations. I tried to be cordial, explaining that I was aware of the rules and didn't need her to come over. But that didn't stop her. It was clear that Karen wasn't going to stop until she had full control over everything I did in my own home. It was at that moment that I realized this wasn't just about enforcing rules, it was about power. And Karen seemed to revel in it. She thrived on finding fault in every little thing I did, no matter how trivial. The tension was palpable. The once peaceful neighborhood I had moved to now felt like a place where I had to be constantly vigilant, watching for any sign that Karen would strike next. I knew I couldn't keep up with her constant demands, and I began to feel trapped in my own home. I was starting to dread opening my front door, wondering if today would be the day Karen would come knocking again with yet another complaint. This was no longer about following the rules, it was a power struggle, and I was caught right in the middle of it. Things escalated quickly from what I had hoped would be a minor issue to something far more uncomfortable and frustrating. It started with a simple request that I thought was reasonable enough to comply with. After weeks of minor complaints, Karen knocked on my door one Saturday afternoon. She was holding a clipboard, her usual stern expression plastered on her face. "I need to talk to you about the front yard," she said, her tone more commanding than polite. At first, I thought it was just another complaint about the lawn or my mailbox. But this time, it was different. She told me that the small shrub I had planted in my front yard was out of compliance with the HOA's landscaping guidelines. The shrub was a gift from a close friend, and it held sentimental value to me, but I didn't think it was worth the fight. So, I promised I would look into moving it and adjusting the garden accordingly. I spent the next weekend working on my front yard, trimming the bushes and rearranging the plants as best as I could. But when I finished, it still wasn't good enough. Karen came over once again, clipboard in hand, and gave me a long lecture about how the plants weren't arranged symmetrically and how they didn't fit the HOA's approved aesthetic. I was dumbfounded. I had spent hours trying to meet her standards, and yet, here she was, still finding fault with everything. It seemed like no matter what I did, Karen was determined to keep finding reasons to criticize. I tried explaining that I was working within the guidelines, but it didn't seem to matter. She was unrelenting, and her presence felt suffocating. I realized at that point that no matter how much I tried to please her, she wasn't interested in compromise. As the days passed, Karen's complaints grew increasingly ridiculous. She complained about the color of my doormat, saying it didn't match the neighborhood's approved color palette. Then, she came by to check on my driveway and pointed out that the angle of my car's tires wasn't perfectly aligned with the parking space lines. These complaints were becoming absurd. It was as though Karen was actively searching for anything, to criticize. Her obsession with perfection was starting to take a toll on me, and I was becoming frustrated. It felt as though the simple act of living in my own house was being challenged by someone who had far too much control over what was meant to be my private space. The tipping point came when Karen informed me that I had violated the HOA's pet policy. I was taken aback. I don't have any pets. When I tried to explain this, she insisted that she had seen something suspicious in my backyard that resembled a small, colorful bird feeder I had placed near the garden. Apparently, according to Karen, the bird feeder could be considered pet-related, and I had to remove it. The ridiculousness of the situation hit me hard. I couldn't believe that Karen would try to find fault with something so innocent. It was as if she was nitpicking my every move, taking every possible chance to make my life miserable. At that point, I knew I couldn't keep up with her demands anymore. The situation had gone from manageable to unbearable. I was being harassed over things that didn't matter, things that didn't even affect the community in any meaningful way. I started feeling like I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next complaint to come in the mail or for Karen to knock on my door again with her clipboard. This wasn't about rules or regulations anymore. This was personal. Karen had crossed a line, and I had had enough. But I didn't know what to do next. I was stuck. The HOA was supposed to be a helpful organization, but it had become a source of stress and tension. I wanted to stand up for myself, but I didn't know how. I had always tried to be respectful and follow the rules, but no matter what I did, it wasn't enough for Karen. Things were escalating out of control, and it seemed like there was no way out of this constant cycle of complaints and frustration. Every time I thought I was doing the right thing, Karen would find a new way to make me feel like I wasn't doing enough. It was a never-ending battle, and I felt like I was losing. The peaceful life I had imagined for myself was slipping away, replaced by a toxic, oppressive environment created by someone who seemed to derive pleasure from watching others suffer. The situation was far beyond what I could have ever anticipated when I first moved into the neighborhood, and it was about to get worse. The situation took a dramatic turn when Karen escalated things even further by calling the police on me. It felt like a cruel twist of fate, as everything had started out so innocently, an attempt to live peacefully within the community, only for it to spiral into this absurd confrontation. It all began when Karen showed up one afternoon, her face stern as usual, but this time, she was clutching her phone. "I've had enough," she declared. "I am calling the cops on you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't even know what I had done this time. Apparently, the issue was something completely unexpected. She had complained to the HOA about me violating the community noise guidelines during a weekend barbecue I had hosted a few weeks earlier. I couldn't believe it. The barbecue had been well within the HOA's designated hours, and the noise level was moderate. In fact, I had taken extra care to keep things low-key, knowing that it was a family-friendly neighborhood. But according to Karen, it was too loud, too disruptive. It had gone on too late. Despite my attempts to explain that the noise was within the allowable limits and that the gathering had long since ended by the time she had claimed it was an issue, Karen wasn't hearing any of it. Her demeanor was different that day. She was no longer just a neighbor with strict standards. She had become an adversary, someone determined to make my life difficult. I tried to remain calm, reasoning with her that I had already apologized for not filling out the required forms and promised to follow all rules moving forward. But it didn't matter. She wasn't interested in reconciliation or compromise. It was clear that this wasn't about the noise or any minor infraction anymore. She was personally invested in causing trouble, and she wasn't going to let it go. As I stood there, trying to process what she was saying, she dialed the police. Within minutes, a patrol car arrived in front of my house, lights flashing. I could hardly believe it. This situation had spiraled so far out of control that the police were now involved over what should have been a harmless neighborhood dispute. I felt humiliated as I explained to the officers what had happened. I tried to explain the situation calmly, but Karen's words seemed to carry more weight than mine. The officers listened to her side of the story and then turned to me. It felt like they were simply doing their job, but it was clear that they didn't understand why this had even become an issue. They asked if I had any evidence to support my side, and I explained that I had a few neighbors who could confirm the gathering had ended before the supposed noise complaint. But nothing could clear the air in that moment. The whole situation was awkward and uncomfortable. Karen stood there, watching me, practically gloating as the police officers seemed to be siding with her. It was as if she had the power to make things go her way simply by making a phone call. The officers eventually left after realizing there was no solid proof of any violation. But the damage had already been done. I felt violated, and the sense of injustice was overwhelming. To be accused of something so trivial, so baseless, and to have the police involved over it felt like an abuse of authority. But what hurt the most was that I had been caught in the middle of a power struggle, Karen using the system to impose her control over me, and me struggling to defend my own space. The entire incident left a bad taste in my mouth. It wasn't just about the complaint anymore. It was about Karen's blatant disregard for my privacy and peace of mind. I felt helpless, like I had no say in my own life, with her continuously using her influence to create issues where there were none. The worst part was realizing that I couldn't stop her from making these false claims. And it seemed like the HOA, which was supposed to protect the interests of the homeowners, was instead enabling her behavior. I had tried to reason with Karen, to keep the peace, but it was clear she had no intention of backing down. The worst part of all this was that now, despite my efforts to do everything by the book, I was the one who had to prove my innocence in front of the authorities. And that was something I never expected when I moved into this neighborhood. In the end, the police left with no action taken, but the damage to my sense of security and trust had already been done. I began to feel like the whole neighborhood was against me, and the weight of Karen's influence was suffocating. It wasn't just about the noise complaint, it was about the power she wielded, and how she had used it to make my life miserable. The frustration and helplessness I felt were unbearable. The tension between us had reached a boiling point, and it was only a matter of time before something even worse would happen. The peace I had once sought in my new home was slipping further and further away, and I didn't know how much longer I could endure this constant pressure. The moment I discovered that my property had been vandalized, it was as if the final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Up until then, I had been dealing with Karen's constant complaints, the police involvement, and the endless cycle of tension. But when I stepped out of my house that morning to find my front yard in disarray, I knew things had gone too far. The sight before me was both shocking and infuriating. My once carefully maintained lawn was covered in what looked like slashed flowers, broken plant pots, and there was paint splattered on my porch, the bright orange hue unmistakable against the cream-colored walls of my house. It was clear that someone had done this deliberately. My stomach sank as I tried to process what had happened. The thought that someone had gone so far as to destroy my property over petty disagreements was almost too much to bear. I didn't have to think long to know who was behind it. Karen had already shown that she wasn't interested in resolving things peacefully. This felt like her doing, the culmination of everything that had happened. She had already shown herself capable of bending the rules to her will. And now, she had escalated things to a whole new level. As I stood there in disbelief, trying to assess the damage, my mind raced with anger and frustration. How could anyone, let alone a neighbor, go this far? I had tried to keep things civil, to follow the rules, and all it had gotten me was harassment, and now this. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I walked over to inspect the damage more closely. The orange paint was splattered across my porch steps and the side of my house, clearly meant to be a mark of some kind. As I moved further into the yard, I found that my favorite garden statue, one I had bought for its sentimental value, had been knocked over and cracked into pieces. It was something I had cherished, a symbol of my new life here, and now it was ruined. I couldn't help but feel violated. My home, which had been my sanctuary from the outside world, was now a battleground. Someone had crossed a line. I took pictures of the damage, hoping that the evidence would be enough to prove that this wasn't just a random act of vandalism. I couldn't let it go unaddressed. But as I stood there, feeling the weight of the situation, I realized just how much this was going to affect me. It wasn't just the physical damage to my property, it was the emotional toll this entire ordeal had taken on me. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering what would happen next. The peaceful life I had envisioned when I moved in had been replaced by anxiety and fear. I decided that I couldn't let this go unnoticed. I contacted the HOA immediately, hoping they would take action and hold Karen accountable for her actions. After all, this was a clear violation of both the HOA rules and the law. The damage was not just cosmetic, it was personal. But when I reached out to the HOA, I was met with an indifferent response. They acknowledged the situation but seemed unwilling to take any serious steps. It was as if the HOA had become complicit in Karen's behavior, choosing to ignore her extreme actions rather than confronting them head-on. I felt betrayed. The very organization that was supposed to protect homeowners like me seemed more interested in avoiding conflict than upholding justice. As time passed, I realized that I couldn't wait for the HOA to take action. So I took matters into my own hands. I filed a police report about the vandalism, documenting everything as thoroughly as possible. The officer who arrived was sympathetic but seemed skeptical about the situation. It felt like they didn't fully grasp the gravity of what I was experiencing. After all, this wasn't just about a few broken pots or some paint on the porch, it was about the complete breakdown of respect and boundaries. Karen had crossed a line, and now it felt like everyone else was turning a blind eye. The police took the report, but as the days went on, it became clear that finding the culprit would be difficult. There were no security cameras in the neighborhood, and no direct evidence linking Karen to the crime, despite the fact that everything pointed to her. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was behind it all. The sense of violation and helplessness I felt only deepened as I realized that, despite my best efforts, I was no closer to resolving the situation. In the end, the vandalism wasn't just an act of destruction. It was a symbolic gesture, an attempt to assert control, to show me who was really in charge. Karen had made her point, but so had I. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. And I wasn't going to let her continue to terrorize me or anyone else in the neighborhood. The damage she had caused went beyond the physical. It had shattered my sense of security and trust in the community. But I wasn't going to let that be the end of the story. I knew I had to stand up for myself and take action, not just for my own peace of mind, but for the integrity of the entire neighborhood. If Karen was allowed to get away with this, who knew what she would do next? I wasn't about to wait around to find out. After the vandalism and the police involvement, I realized that simply letting things slide was no longer an option. I had been trying to handle the situation with patience, hoping it would resolve on its own. But Karen's actions had crossed a line that I couldn't ignore. The physical damage to my property was just the tip of the iceberg. What really hurt was the constant feeling of being harassed and powerless in my own home. It became clear that I needed to take action, not just for my own peace of mind, but to stop Karen from continuing to bully me and potentially other neighbors. My first step was to gather as much evidence as possible. I knew that without solid proof, there was no way I could fight this on my own. I had already documented the vandalism, but now I needed to build a case that would hold up in any legal or HOA-related dispute. I started by taking detailed photos of the damage to my property, making sure to capture everything clearly. I also made sure to keep records of the previous complaints and incidents Karen had made against me, including any correspondence with the HOA or police. I wanted to ensure that, if this escalated further, I would have all the facts on my side. I reached out to my neighbors to see if they had witnessed anything or had been affected by Karen's behavior. To my surprise, a few of them came forward and shared their own experiences. Some had been similarly targeted by Karen over trivial matters, while others had seen her lurking around my property on the day of the vandalism. This was the breakthrough I needed. The idea that I wasn't alone in this struggle gave me the confidence to keep pushing forward. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about making sure Karen didn't continue to use her power to intimidate and control others in the neighborhood. Armed with this new information, I decided to confront Karen directly. I knew that confronting her could lead to more tension, but I wasn't about to let her control the narrative anymore. I showed up at her doorstep, determined to make my intentions clear. When she opened the door, her expression immediately shifted from neutral to defensive. I didn't waste any time. I told her that I knew what she had done to my property, and that I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I explained that I had gathered evidence, including witness statements from neighbors, and that I was prepared to take legal action if necessary. Karen's reaction was nothing like I had expected. Instead of offering an apology or even attempting to justify her actions, she became hostile. She started denying everything, claiming that she had no involvement in the vandalism and that I was simply trying to make her the scapegoat for something I couldn't prove. It was clear that she wasn't going to admit to anything, but I didn't let her deflect. I told her that I had no intention of making things personal, but I was fully prepared to take it to court if she continued with her harassment. I made it clear that the HOA and the police would be involved, and that I wasn't going to back down. The confrontation, while tense, was necessary. I felt a sense of relief afterward, knowing that I had stood up for myself and made it clear that I wouldn't let Karen intimidate me any longer. I also reached out to the HOA once again, this time with the full support of my neighbors. I presented my evidence and insisted that they take responsibility for allowing someone like Karen to create such a toxic environment in the neighborhood. The HOA had been largely indifferent before, but now they had no choice but to take my concerns seriously. Things didn't change overnight, but they started to improve. The HOA took more proactive steps to address the issue, reminding Karen and the other residents of the community guidelines and the importance of respecting each other. I wasn't the only one who benefited from this. Several of my neighbors who had been harassed by Karen found themselves in a better position as well. The HOA made it clear that there would be consequences if anyone violated the rules again, and Karen seemed to back off for the time being. The experience was a tough lesson in standing up for myself and taking control when others try to take it from you. I learned that sometimes the only way to deal with a bully is to call them out and show that you won't tolerate their behavior. It wasn't easy, and it took time to regain my peace of mind, but I felt stronger for having gone through it. I also realized that I couldn't rely on the HOA or the police to solve everything for me. Sometimes, you have to fight for what's right, even if it means going against the system. While things were relatively calm after the confrontation, I knew I had to stay vigilant. I couldn't let my guard down completely. But for the first time in months, I felt like I had regained control of my own home and my own life. Karen may have thought she could intimidate me, but I had learned that standing up for yourself was the most powerful tool you could have. And for me, that was the most important victory of all. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps support the channel, and you'll be the first to know when we drop new videos. Also, make sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the latest updates. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.